All right, and welcome to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I am your host, Sean Meyers, joined by Sean Saputo this Friday afternoon. And Sean, we want to get into Backlash. A little less than a week ago, the first co-branded pay-per-view, I guess the first time that it is full-time co-branded, because obviously the big four have been co-branded since Raw and SmackDown split, but now they go every single pay-per-view co-branded. Kyle Dawson and I talked about our concerns heading into the show about the fact that you're going to have 4 or 5 big matches on Raw, 4 or 5 big matches on SmackDown, and your mid-card, your tag team, your women, if they're not the cream of the crop or at the very most prominent storyline, they're not going to get featured. I think that this Backlash suffered as a result of a lot of stars not getting an opportunity. And the ones who did, I just didn't think that the matches, for the most part, delivered. So what's your initial take overall on Backlash before we get into a match-by-match review?
It was a pay-per-view that really suffered due to the extensive schedule that has happened over the last month and a half. From WrestleMania to the trip to South Africa, back to the United States, back over to Saudi, back to the United States, and then, only having a couple weeks to rebuild what you're working on. It was a pay-per-view that included a lot of matches that you expected to be a part of the card, just in the terms of you have your Miz versus Seth Rollins, which was an expected match. Alexa Bliss and Nia, a repeat match. Shinsuke and AJ, a repeat match. It just didn't leave much to the mind in terms of what they were given. A lot of matches just kind of pieced and thrown together. And it was not successful. The first match started out, it looked like it had a chance to, maybe exceed expectations as to what people had, but in the long run, it really just ended up kind of boring out until the Roman Reigns Samoa Joe match, and the physicality of that match was kind of made for a decent ending to the pay-per-view. But in context, like you had mentioned, the talk of AJ and Nakamura being the final match, thank goodness it wasn't. Just because that the way it ended, it was a cheesy way of continuing on this feud between the two, and they continue to not let certain feuds go to the extent that they're capable of going to, and Backlash didn't deliver in terms of the awe factor that many of us want to see.
So let's talk a little bit about working from the end back to the beginning of the show. You mentioned you thought that maybe the best match, certainly I don't think there's much argument, the best match was the first one of the night 100%. Between Miz and Rollins. However, the show did not conclude in very strong fashion. You look at how things wrapped up, it was the Samoa Joe Roman Reigns match, and it made sense as to why they went with this match when you consider the ending of the AJ and Nakamura. You didn't want that to close out the show. But to me, Roman and Joe really fell flat, and I'm not exactly sure why it turned out as it did. If you really look at it, it was a match that was extremely slow-paced, and I know for Samoa Joe, he probably was getting a lot of heat and a lot of criticism for how slowly he worked this match. He had lengthy submission holds, if you want to call them that, but they were basically headlocks and things of that nature. The crowd was not into it because of such a slow start. And in 2018, it's tough to make a match work when you go at that slow of a pace for the first 15 or so minutes. It doesn't help matters that people do not want to see Roman Reigns in a main event time after time. So it just seemed like a recipe for disaster when it all was said and done. These two did not have the match that I think they're capable of, and the fans, I think, even 5 to 10 minutes into this match really checked out from a mental perspective. So, to me, it's one that could have been a pretty solid match. It did not work out like that. What the reports now say, however, Sean, is that this was maybe an eye-opening experience for Vince McMahon to see that there were fans walking out on the main event between Samoa Joe and Roman Reigns it could go a couple of ways. They could sort of hold this against Samoa Joe and say this guy's not a main eventer, so on and so forth. I don't think that certainly should be the result. We'll see if they maybe change their path with Roman Reigns. We've talked about it so many times. They have to do something different at this point. You and I both like Roman for his in-ring ability, just his overall look, but the way that he's being presented is just not working, and it's something that they need to fix and fix immediately if they're going to continue to use him in these prominent matches, because this, more than anything else, showed that the fans do not want the same old stuff with Roman Reigns in terms of him being a face working the main event.
Well, he kind of showed a different side on Monday night, though, in his locker room interview before the triple threat match to get into the Money in the Bank. And if that's the start of planting little seeds of him just completely changing his demeanor, his attitude towards those who are interviewing him, I think that would be a solid start. I think giving Roman the victory was a sour spot to begin with, just because he hasn't done much in terms of winning lately, and it would have just only made the storyline better and continued to fuel the fire had they have kept him from winning. And it was kind of like, oh, well, we can't have our guy lose too much here, so we need to kind of get him victory. But I think him in a continuous losing streak would have been much better in terms of finding a way to slowly switch him over to the heel side. But it's so hard to tell with him what WWE wants to do. They start pushing him, they start riding him high, and then when the fans continue to just not enjoy it, they continue to pull the plug, and it just, but no matter what, they're still keeping him in the main event level. They won't just simply pull the plug long enough. It's like, okay, we're going to get him on a roll again, we're going to have him win at WrestleMania. All right, well, the fans aren't liking this, they're not perceiving this, now we got to pull the plug, we're going to keep it on Lesnar. It's just been mass confusion as of late, and they don't know what to do with him.
Do you think Roman Reigns is starting to, in real life, not the character, but the real man, is he starting to get frustrated, and is it affecting him in a negative way? Because I think he's had so many great underrated matches over the years, but his last 3 or 4 big-time matches, the ones against Lesnar, this one against Joe, I thought they all came up short of what he's capable of. I remember when he had his 2 matches at pay-per-views against AJ Styles, the fans hated him so much that I feel like it almost fired him up, and he was better for it. He kind of was wrestling with a chip on his shoulder. Now it just seems like he just doesn't seem to have that same drive over the past couple months. I think it's starting to actually wear on him that he keeps getting this.
See, I don't like comparing guys in their in-ring matches, especially when they're going up against Brock Lesnar.
It is tough to work with him, no doubt.
Simply because, I mean, Brock Lesnar in the ring is exactly what you get out of a heavyweight in a boxing fight and in a UFC match. It's not a fast-paced match, and I'm sorry, but, you know, maybe I'm a fan of Brock Lesnar, always have been. But his in-ring style is so dry. It's suplex, punch, elbow, F5. And people say, and people want to go after Roman Reigns and talk about how he's not good in the ring, it's the same moveset. How John Cena's not good in the ring, it's the same moveset. But those are the same people that go in and week out just to see Brock Lesnar and cheer on Brock Lesnar. And if you actually sit there and watch a match and try to, you know, take notes on what's going on, every Brock Lesnar match is the exact same thing. There is nothing different.
A bunch of finishers both ways. I mean,
exactly.
The cage match was just Superman punch, spear, F5, or suplex.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's one thing I will never understand with some people is they'll go after wrestlers and talk about how they don't like them because of, you know, they're being shoved down our throats, or their in-ring style is the same exact thing every time. Well, you now have a champion for over 400 days who, technically, when he's there, they shove him down your throat, and he puts on the exact same match every time. There's no difference to it.
So let's move on to the one World Championship match, that being the AJ Styles Nakamura. It was the third time that these two have competed in about a month's time. I thought that was too much. You don't want to have these guys wrestling that frequently because it starts to lose something. When they were set to meet at WrestleMania, there was so much anticipation in this match. It was realistically, for many fans, and I know you are more geared towards the Japanese wrestling scene, Sean, it was a dream match, and that was an accurate term for a lot of fans. Did not live up to it at WrestleMania, and that's because, one, I think they wrestled with the mindset that this is the start of the feud, not the end of it. We're not going to give everything we have out there. No, you're not going to pull out all the stops because there's more to come. Then they wrestle about 2 weeks later at the Greatest Royal Rumble. Nothing special about that match. And then they do it a third time at Backlash with the stipulation of no DQ. Thought we were going to see something really creative, and Kyle and I talked about how the low blow would factor in. It certainly did factor in, but it factored in a way that left everyone pretty much unhappy with the double, I don't even know what you call it. It was a draw because neither man could answer the count of 10 after they crushed each other with low blow kicks. So I was not satisfied with this match. I understand they had to find a way to keep it going, but at this point, why do you need a fourth match when the first three really haven't delivered?
Because, honestly, there's nothing over on SmackDown right now that has any factor in what AJ Styles is doing. They have put so much time into building this feud with him and Nakamura that it seems like there is no backup plan right now in terms of who could even come after the WWE title. I mean, if you sit there and you look at the SmackDown roster, especially with the shakeup that happened over this time frame, who can you sit there and point out right now? Because, I mean, with Samoa Joe losing to Roman Reigns...
Well, that's the guy I was going to say. Samoa Joe would have been a perfect option. When he lost to Roman Reigns, and really because the AJ Nakamura match came about 45 minutes earlier, with no clear winner, you knew that feud was going to continue. So at that point, Samoa Joe was going to have to wait. So while it would have made sense for him to win and go on to AJ, they decided they wanted to continue the Nakamura-AJ feud. And I think that, more than anything, determined why Samoa Joe was able to lose his match against Roman.
But who else is really there on SmackDown that right now is a worthy opponent for AJ Styles?
Are we talking basically just as a heel?
In general.
Daniel Bryan.
He just lost the Rusev clean.
Well, that's again, these are all things that they could have done.
Yeah.
They're deciding not to.
You can't put Daniel, and I won't even say Daniel Bryan's an option because every time he breaks the glass ceiling, he gets hurt.
Well, at this point, I think, and I don't want to spend too much time on Daniel Bryan, but if you're WWE, you sort of look at it like, we can't anticipate that he's going to be around for years and years. Let's say we're confident that we can have him up until next year's WrestleMania, okay? We have basically 11 months at this point to use him as we like. You want to fill that time with the best possible matches. Do you really want him against Big Cass for another 2 or 3 months? Or do you want him against Samoa Joe? Do you want him against Shinsuke Nakamura? Do you want him against AJ Styles? And then maybe culminate it with something at WrestleMania on the other side against maybe a Seth Rollins, maybe even a Roman Reigns. You have to maximize your time with him because he is on borrowed time at this point, I think. And we did see Shawn Michaels come back from what looked like a career-ending injury, and he had, an 8+ year run in his second time around? But I think that's not the norm. You can't expect that with Daniel Bryan. So I would jump right into marquee matches with him because you know the fans are going to be behind it.
Yeah, but in an overall context of this whole thing, they have to build Shinsuke's heel character. And having him flip back and forth between feuds isn't going to help build that character. It all started with AJ Styles changing him heel, and now you have to roll with it and let him get the work in and proving he is going to be one of the top heels on SmackDown Live. And it has to be done doing so with AJ Styles because that's where it all started.
Did you think that prior to the ending that this was the best of their 3 matches at Backlash?
No.
Okay, so I sort of thought that it had the potential to be the best. However, the ending, again, it leaves everyone unhappy. And the problem you have is when you go forward, next match, you probably save it for the TLC's the next pay-per-view, right?
Money in the Bank.
I'm terrible. I will admit, as a wrestling fan, I should be much better. Well, you have to climb a ladder to get the Money in the Bank, so I had one of the concepts right. So at Money in the Bank, you figure these two have another match. At that point, do you look at it as a match that AJ wins to end the feud? Because if not, if Nakamura wins this match, then you feel like it's going to extend even further. So there's a potential, if Nakamura does come out on top, that you run this all the way maybe up to SummerSlam and you get a legitimate 5 or 6 month feud out of these two.
Shinsuke wins.
And then AJ has to challenge back, right?
Well, just remember, they already have, the promo for Extreme Rules in Pittsburgh where they're talking about AJ and Shinsuke in a title match. So, it's going to at least go on another month potentially. But here's the thing. They're talking about wanting to make Money in the Bank one of the big 5 now pay-per-views rather than having big 4. So, with Brock Lesnar most likely not being on the card at Money in the Bank, despite the Money in the Bank ladder matches, you have to have one more big thing happen if you're going to if you want to make this one of your big pay-per-views every year. So I could see Shinsuke finally winning the title at Money in the Bank just to, make Money in the Bank being in its first run as a major pay-per-view have that awe factor to it.
Let's move on to a match that certainly had the awe factor to it. It was Seth Rollins and The Miz. It started off Backlash. We thought it would be a good match. Kyle and I picked it as probably what would be the best match, and it turned out certainly to blow away everything else. It was interesting because when you look at it on the surface, the outcome was probably pretty clear. Now, I liked, Sean, that you provided the possibility every pay-per-view dual branded. They could move both the U.S. and Intercontinental title to the same brand for a month or so. You can't do it long term, but it does give that possibility. However, I think smart money was on Seth Rollins all along, and he did retain. That being said, there were at least 2 or 3 instances in the match where I believe The Miz actually was going to win. And that's, I think, a testament to how good these guys were. They made you believe that The Miz could actually win this one, even though all logic pointed towards Seth Rollins.
Yeah.
I thought it was tremendous. I'm not a huge fan of a ton of false finishes all the time. To me, that screams of the indie style and the Ring of Honor, where you see 5 or 6 finishing moves hit every single match, and you never know which one's going to win, and it doesn't make a lot of sense why one gets you the win, whereas another doesn't. However, in this scenario, it worked to add to the match. The Miz hit his finisher, the skull-crushing finale, twice. Rarely do you see someone kick out of it. Seth did both times. He sold his injury tremendously. I just thought it was a nearly perfect match to start the show. Unfortunately, it set the bar too high that the rest of the show never had really any opportunity to meet just how everything else unfolded. But you look back 6 months from now, you'll remember that as being this match of the pay-per-view that really succeeded.
And see, I don't have a problem with, especially at these low-end pay-per-views, if you know how matches are going to go and you know how matches are going to end, why not do it in a way that WWE did it back at No Mercy when Dolph Ziggler put his career on the line against The Miz for the Intercontinental title? Let that match conclude the show. If you're going to have a match like Seth Rollins versus The Miz lead things off, and you know how you're giving them this amount of time and what they're going to put on in the ring. And, I mean, WWE had to have known that that was going to be the best match of the night, period. Why not give that the main event spot and give the people something to go home thinking, wow, this show was pretty slow, but what an ending to this. Like, this made up for the whole night. You can't sit there and say that in the first match of the night, it's like, wow, now we need to sit here and we better see some pretty darn good matches if this is what we're going to start out with. And then you go home disappointed. You can go home on a high note if that closes. You go home disappointed if that's what starts, and the rest is like null and void from there.
Right.
And I wish WWE would do that more. Is instead of focusing on a random match, interpromotional match between Roman Reigns and Samoa Joe, and the WWE title match that's going to end with a double low blow, just put that as the main event. You can have a mid-card title be a main event title, or a main event match, considering, especially the Intercontinental title, is the main title on Monday Night Raw.
I would agree in a sense. I will say it's tough to book a pay-per-view in terms of match orders based on what you think will be good versus what you think might not be good. That's the reason why AJ and Nakamura didn't close out the show, probably, is because of the bogus ending. I think that the internal hope was that Roman and Joe would be a good match. It was not. The fans didn't buy it. But to your point, you know the fans are going to be behind a Rollins-Miz match. You understand that whether it comes first or last, people are going to be engaged. So, yeah, I would be on board with something along those lines where you maybe switch it up and you don't always have the same 4 or 6 guys closing out pay-per-views all the time. Maybe every now and then pick a match that's a good high mid-card match, but it's going to be a great match. This upcoming pay-per-view could provide that opportunity. Do you have the men's Money in the Bank close out the show? Do you have AJ and Nakamura close out the show? Or do you have something involving Roman Reigns? That's probably what it's going to end up being at this point. I don't know if Reigns ultimately will work his way into the Money in the Bank, but if they go, let's say, for instance, theoretically, it's Roman and Lesnar, that's going to close out the show no matter what, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
maybe they should reconsider how they arrange some of these things. Nonetheless, Rollins and Miz was terrific. Best match by far. And I think it worked for everyone. There's no one that's going to really have a complaint about that match. Again, I said you don't like maybe Miz not converting on either of his finishing moves, but that is nitpicking at the highest degree. I thought it was a nearly perfect match, and by far the best. A match that really I don't think came across all that well was the Daniel Bryan Big Cass match. It was great to see Daniel Bryan back in the ring, no doubt about that, but the match just seemed to lack sizzle to me. It was one where it was pretty basic. Daniel Bryan won relatively easily, and then, no surprise, he got beat down after the match. So you give Cass a little bit of momentum because he beats down Daniel Bryan. It makes him more of a heel. But if you're looking for positives for Big Cass, do you look at this match and say all of a sudden this is a main event caliber guy or a guy that can work with top stars? I didn't see that in this match, and I know that as a 7-footer, he's not going to be able to go toe-to-toe with a Daniel Bryan or some of the best guys. But if you want him in the main event picture and you want him working with a Daniel Bryan or an AJ Styles, is he good enough at this point? I know he's also still working his way back from injury, but for me, it was a pretty short, basic match where you didn't get to see a lot of Big Cass, and to me, he did not impress with his performance. And for Daniel Bryan, he was perfectly fine, but I would have liked to have seen more. I would have liked to have seen a better matchup for him, at least in the ring.
Well, I didn't think, no, it doesn't make Big Cass a main event level guy just yet. But again, in his singles career, who has Cass really wrestled that has opened the door for him to be a true main eventer? He's never had that high quality marquee match. So Cass is still getting his feet under him in terms of working with high-end caliber guys in the business. This was just the start. and that's what I think people are overshadowing and viewing in terms of this match is people think like, oh, like he's going to go out there, he needs to put on this spectacular show right away and prove that he's a main eventer. It doesn't work that way. It's going to have to come with time, and putting him in a feud with Daniel Bryan to start out is only going to help him and be capable of working with guys that are Daniel Bryan's size, maybe 6'1", 6'2". So it's just one of those things where he had to get in there, get his feet wet, and work along the lines and continue to work towards growing in the ring against upper mid card and world champion contenders, and that's the way it's got to be. It's not going to be a perfect match to begin with. You got to let time go by with this if they're going to, and they need to do it correctly too. And I think it was. Well, it wasn't a great match. I think it was the start of a foundation for Cass more so than it was, trying to put on the spectacular to start things off.
Do you have any issue with the fact that he tapped out seemingly relatively easily in this match?
That, yes. I didn't understand that. If you're trying to book him as this, 7-foot monster heel, you don't have him tap out like 2 seconds after Daniel Bryan gets the submission hold locked in.
I thought it looked like a pretty easy match for Daniel Bryan the way they presented it. It didn't seem like Big Cass provided a real stiff challenge.
And maybe that's the route they're going in terms of making Big Cass, a main heel is they're not going to try to they're going to more so, let him get worked over and do that and just maybe make it relatively easy. Like, hey, have Daniel Bryan talk about how Cass thinks he's a main eventer and he can't even put on, main event caliber match and how easy it was for Daniel Bryan to, coast through to victory. Maybe that's the way they do it, is just to have him get, beat relatively easy to start out. And then as time goes by, he continues to, push and push more.
We talk about Big Cass. Let's shift to his former girlfriend, Carmella. She had her biggest match to date in the company against Charlotte. It was for the SmackDown Women's title, and this one, more than anything else, was the shocker of the night for me. I was expecting Carmella to hang on to the title. I thought that she needed to have at least one more pay-per-view before she dropped it ultimately to Charlotte, and I do think that will happen. Not surprised that she kept the title. I was surprised that she won this match cleanly. No outside interference, no real cheating on her part. She just beat Charlotte. And it's crazy to think that a month ago, now maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, but within very recent history, Charlotte was cleanly ending Asuka's undefeated streak at WrestleMania. So you fast forward to Backlash, and somehow Carmella, who had been an afterthought for so many months despite having the Money in the Bank contract, she's now the champion, and she defeats Charlotte cleanly. That is certainly one way to elevate her standing. Not sure that she deserves to be among one of the very top women in the company, but she's getting the opportunity. You have to at least give WWE credit for trying to elevate someone else. It's sort of just weird to me, however, that while elevating Carmella, it comes at the expense of Charlotte, and really it also comes at the expense of Asuka. You make Asuka look even worse by having Charlotte beat cleanly. So I was surprised. I'll wait to see how they ultimately finish up this feud. I think that Charlotte does, again, win the title back maybe as early as Money in the Bank. But to me, for Carmella winning cleanly, it could have negative effects on how you present Charlotte and Asuka going forward.
Well, see, I disagree. Just because Charlotte has the backing of WWE, has the backing of the fans, and has the bright future and continuous future behind her. See, and it only boosts the build for somebody like Carmella if they want to make her into, a threat down the stretches. She has to do it against someone that it's believable, like that it's near unbelievable to do against. In an in-ring match, 9.9 out of 10 times Charlotte is winning that match. But it allows Carmella to build. And Charlotte is to that point now over the last few years where she is going to play that role of building younger talent. I mean, look at Becky Lynch losing to Mandy Rose clean.
Well, I had an issue with that as well. We'll get to that when we get to SmackDown. But
these women are to the point now where with this young talent coming up, if they're going to keep bringing up this young talent like the Iconics, like Absolution, like the Riot Squad, somebody has to help boost them to have a brighter future for the women's division, and it's going to be Charlotte, Becky Lynch, Sasha Banks, Bayley, Natalya. They have to take that spot in terms of, we know we're going to have to lose here coming up to these girls and show that they are the future.
So then instead of a 4 or 5 women-led division, you have 10 or so women that have a legitimate chance. I get that. And I agree that Charlotte is in a spot where she can lose and it won't hurt her too much. My question goes back to, though, the timing of it. A month ago, she ends the undefeated streak.
The timing is weird, but they don't have, like on the men's side, like a John Cena or somebody or a woman in that age range that can just go out there and build somebody that has 10 plus years of experience that can build young talent. Their veteran talent in the women division that is there week in, week out has been there, 5 years? 4 years?
I mean, Natalya would be really the only exception, and then Mickie James. The problem with Mickie and Natalya is they're both a little bit lower in the pecking order.
Alicia Fox is she there still?
She hasn't been on TV. I think she might be. She might have been injured. I believe she got injured actually right before the women's Royal Rumble.
Your two longest tenured women's wrestlers are Alicia Fox and Natalya, and then Mickie James, if you want to count her now that she's come back. So you have to utilize these women that have been here only 4 or 5 years as the pieces of growing, the future.
So there were some other matches at Backlash that really nothing special. The Jeff Hardy, Randy Orton. I was actually a little disappointed. Thought that match would have been a little bit better. That said, it was perfectly fine. Jeff Hardy retaining, no surprise. Little disappointed, more so in the fact that nothing as of yet came out of it with Randy Orton maybe turning heel. The Braun and Bobby Lashley versus KO and Sami Zayn was sort of exactly what we thought it would be. It was almost a replica of the Monday Night Raw match where it was pretty much a squash. Nothing interesting came out of that one again. Missed opportunities probably for both of those matches to do something a little bit more creative, to make it something that stands out. They just went straight forward. And, I think the matches sort of fell a little flat. And then the Nia Jax, Alexa Bliss, exactly what we expected on that one as well. So when you really get down to it, there wasn't a lot that stood out on the show. But one thing that was, I thought, interesting that wasn't even in a match was the performance by Elias, and then it sort of turned into a bit of a mess with everyone getting involved, but it was something different, and I saw a lot of people saying that was actually one of maybe their 3 favorite segments of the entire show. So to basically recap, Elias comes out, wants to sing a song, dedicates it to Bruce Springsteen, and then he's interrupted by the New Day. Sort of weird because they're on different shows, no past relationship between them, but it works because the New Day has the musical background, so they do their whole shtick. And then Aiden English comes out. People have been waiting for months for Aiden and Elias to interact. They finally did with the whole Rusev Day thing. So New Day, Aiden, and Rusev are out there. Then it went maybe a little too far bringing No Way Jose in because
that was awesome.
People at this point are like, well, what is this guy even here for? But he came out with the conga line, also included some guys like Titus Worldwide and Breezango, I believe. So you got a lot of people, at least on the card, that wouldn't have been featured otherwise. And then ultimately the big payoff, as expected, was that Bobby Roode comes out and attacks Elias and gets a measure of revenge. To me, Sean, this was something that, while the show ran way too long, you did not need this show lasting until 11:30 like it did. This would be something maybe if you're trying to cut time, you do cut out, but because they were okay with it being a 3.5-hour show, I thought that the inclusion of this segment actually helped things, and it certainly made Elias look like a bigger star, and it got some other people that need some TV time on the screen, even if it's brief. So to me, it was a segment that worked.
Yeah, I thought so too. It was an entertaining segment, and again, one of those things where, with how dull the pay-per-view had been going on, to have somebody of the caliber that Elias is right now, and how much the fans want to see him, throwing him out there in the ring, and then having that all set up with the setup of a feud with Bobby Roode. I think that was a great plan and a great segment in place. And, Elias, he talks about how WWE stands for Walk with Elias. It's turning into WWE stands for We Want Elias.
That would be a good catchphrase that he maybe could use someday.
Elias, if you're listening.
Again, there was a lot of, as you mentioned, dull moments or things that fell flat for me. So ultimately, this pay-per-view failed to meet expectations, and that's saying something because the expectations were low. Let's hand out quickly grades before we wrap this one up for Backlash. I believe Kyle Dawson, who joined us last week, said he gave it a 2 out of 10. I will say it was slightly better, and that's primarily because of the Miz-Rollins match. That's a match that you could go back anytime throughout the year and watch again and say, what a match. That makes it maybe a 3 on the scale of 1 to 10 for me.
Taking the match between The Miz and Seth Rollins, the Elias New Day whole piece that they did, part of the Samoa Joe Roman Reigns match wasn't terrible after the first 15 minutes. And Jeff Hardy and Randy Orton did an alright, pretty decent job. Shinsuke, AJ had, flashes. I'd give it a 4, 4.5. Just because I understand, just sitting there going like, wow, what the hell is happening? But if you really take a deeper look into it, that Miz Seth Rollins match, Dave Meltzer gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars.
Could have even been higher in my book.
And that right there, I think, with the matches and with the timing that they've had, gives you a 3 out of a 10 already. And then if you include the Elias, skit and, bits and pieces of other matches, were they great matches? No, but every match had something that, gave a little bit, I think. So that's where I give it about the 4.25, 4.5.
All right, so we both agree. Below average pay-per-view. We hope that they get it figured out going forward and will present a much better one in terms of Money in the Bank. But that's going to do it for part 1 of this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. That is the review and wrap-up for Backlash. We'll step aside. We'll be right back, and we will have a review of Raw and SmackDown from this past week as well. Stay right here. We'll have more of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling when we come back.